I call myself a former social justice warrior turned free market education activist. I literally argue for the abolition of the government school system. Is he saying that Jesus is the same as Zeus and Apollo? By the time I graduated college, I was an agnostic. Soon later, I was an atheist. Imagine that 50 million students that the left has on their conveyor belt. And we're like Lucy and Ethel. We're standing there trying to deal with each one of the chocolates, but they can't handle it, can they? We don't have another generation that we can afford to lose. We're already 2 generations down. Now the 3rd generation is swirling around the toilet.
Are you interested in innovation in Christian education? Did you know that there are churches who are waking up to their role in offering K-12 education? They are doing so by opening their doors to offer creative Christian learning environments, providing low-cost, simplified private school options. Many of these learning environments, such as microschools and hybrid schools, offer support to the homeschool community while offering an escape route for students who've been trapped in the public schools and want a way out. Pastors everywhere are realizing that it is time to activate their church and assume their rightful place in discipling our children in the Lord. Not just on Sunday mornings, but Monday through Friday. They are opening their doors and starting unique schools. It is wise to do so. Otherwise, what are we doing? For far too long, Christians have relied on the government to educate our children. This ought not be. We can do better, church, and I can show you how. Wise and Otherwise highlights the successful church and school partnerships. We will learn from pastors who are getting it done and school founders who are on a mission to expand the kingdom of God through K-12 education. Come on, let's enter the arena of K-12 education and redeem it for the glory of God. Hello, I'm here with Lisa Watson today with the Schools Out podcast. Lisa has an incredible story and background, and she brings a lot to the table. She's passionate about school choice. And Lisa, tell us a little bit about your background and where you're coming from and why you're so interested in education freedom.
Oh, hey, Delana. Thanks for having me. Let me just get right into my background is very different than probably most of the people you're going to meet in this movement. I actually come from the left. I call myself a former social justice warrior turned free market education activist. Another label I give myself is I am an abolitionist. I literally argue for the abolition of the government school system to be 100% replaced with a private market. So I'm bold in what I believe, and here's why. I am from Kansas, just like you. I grew up what I now call a marginal Christian girl. So the evangelical Christian conservatives are my target market. I ended up moving to Los Angeles for college, and I got culture shock in a good way. I really loved it. I had a great time. But I did get introduced to some ideas that I was not familiar with. And one of them was a professor who talked about all of the religions and how they were all made up by humans to explain the universe. Well, this challenged my marginally Christian worldview because I had never heard an adult say anything like that. And I remember thinking, is he saying that Jesus is the same as Zeus and Apollo? I was shocked. Well, long story short, it put me in a lot of doubt and confusion. So by the time I graduated college, I was an agnostic. Soon later, I was an atheist. I was in complete unbelief. I've heard this story a lot from Christian parents. They tell me the same thing that is happening to their children or someone in their family. Fast forward, before I graduated, I was doing work study at the Women's Center. Without realizing it, I am being immersed in a feminist worldview. I needed an internship before I graduated, and I interned at Planned Parenthood. So without realizing it, I am being immersed in a pro-abortion worldview. I also have a part-time job at in the telecom industry, and I became a union steward. So for 5 years, I'm also a union steward, but without realizing it, I am being immersed in a socialist worldview. I also get a pivotal introduction. I'm at a party actually with one of my friends, and I get introduced to the president of the ACLU. Within a few weeks, I'm now on the board of the ACLU. I end up becoming the president of my chapter. I am the co-founder of the Racial Justice Task Force. I become the Affirmative Action Officer, and I also joined the board, the New York board. So over the course of almost 10 years, I serve in different capacities and different roles with the ACLU. And to be honest with you, I was living the dream. I
Hmm.
loved it. I had a great time, and I thought that I was just exercising my, as I said, my social justice warrior tendencies. But I had what would be called a supernatural encounter. I ended up starting to research the evidence for God, and true to the scriptures, seek and you will find. I started finding all of this evidence and all of these lies and all of this manipulation that was going on. And by the time it was over, I was really bewildered and I didn't know how that had happened to me. How did I happen to become an atheist, pro-abortion feminist with socialist tendencies? And it turned out that the memories were back to that in an encounter in college with the professor that started the unraveling. So I knew that the education system was the huge driver of all of these worldviews. And so we need to, nothing is going to change if we do not address the education system. And one of the frameworks that I like to give people, and it makes them understand it, so I'm going to give you a little quiz, and 90% of it that people get this answer right. Um, so are you familiar with the television show I Love Lucy?
Yes.
Okay, what's the most popular episode?
Yeah, the one with her and her friend eating the chocolate.
Yes, yes. As I said,
Yeah.
90% of people get it right, and it's the framework for what we're up against. So imagine that conveyor belt with all of those chocolates. That conveyor belt represents 50 million students that the left has on their conveyor belt. The government schools are their conveyor belt to socialism, communism, feminism, pro-abortion, anti-marriage, everything that they're doing. That they have these 50 million soldiers on their conveyor belt. And you and I, we're like Lucy and Ethel. We're standing there trying to deal with each one of the chocolates, but they can't handle it, can they? No matter what, that thing is going faster and faster, and they can't wrap it. And it's a comedy of errors, but it's accurate. So is the best response to continue to try and juggle those chocolates, or for you just to go and shut off the conveyor belt?
Hmm. Wow, that's great. That's a great analogy. Gives us that visual here. So we see the problem. We see the problem in education. So I understand why you would be so passionate about school choice. You talk about school choice as a movement and wanting us to recognize this as a movement. But let's back up a little bit and define school choice. What are we referring to when you say that you're passionate about school choice and seeing this as a movement that's going to reform education? Tell us about it.
Okay, so in general, my definition of school choice is defined as K through 12 education options that allow families to select alternatives to the zip code assigned public schools. It's going to include private schools, charter schools, hybrid schools, homeschooling, or a public school in another district.
Yeah. All
So
right. So
it's
education,
just a marketplace.
it's choice. It's options.
It's
Okay.
just options. The
Mhm.
gold standard is called money follow the child. That just means that the government has a certain amount of funding allocated for each child, and they just give that to the parent, and the parent makes the decision about where that funding is going to be spent. So
Mhm.
as soon as you start talking about it, you're going to come up against a lot of mythology. That's what the left, the opposition to school choice has. They have myths. One of those myths is that, government funds belong in government schools, but that's just a myth because government funds are spread throughout this economy. Government funds go to private landlords for Section 8. Government funds go to private grocery stores for food stamps. Government funds go to private doctors for Medicare. Government funds actually are woven throughout education. So if you go to a preschool, guess what? They're all private. And the
Hmm.
government finances a significant portion of preschool education. Guess what? You can go to college using government funds. We just had that debate with whether or not the government was going to bail out student loans because those student loans were going to, but they were going to private universities. I can go to a university tomorrow and get a degree in becoming a pastor, and I can use government funds.
Hmm.
So even the separation of church and state is false. Most of the preschools are actually located inside of churches. The government funds them. The
Hmm.
only place they say government funds cannot go is K through 12.
So what do you say to Christians? And okay, so I'm from the homeschooling world. And
Mhm.
what do you say when you hear the resistance from those who are on the conservative side and they're saying, we don't want the government money because we're scared of what this might bring, what types of regulations or infringement on our rights and our freedoms?
Well, I get that. And I was a little shocked, to be honest with you. I thought, oh, wow, this is perfect. I'm going to go over, I'm going to start working with evangelicals. Every time I said I was evangelical, I would turn around and say, who said that? Like, did that come out of my mouth? What's going on? But I thought, no, I'm going to go and I'm going to start talking to them. And I think they just don't understand strategy, which they don't. And they just don't understand social movements, which they don't. So I'm going to explain it to them, and then we're all going to get on one team. But I started getting the same argument that you're telling me, and I was shocked. But um, I had to just start wrestling through it, and the homeschoolers would tell me their fears. And I said, there's nothing stopping them from doing that now.
Right.
Right?
True. Hmm.
Right. So it's probably better for us to become a team, the school choice advocates and the homeschool advocates. So now you have people that are working for you and not against you, because you're a very small minority of the education marketplace, right? So when
Right.
we're making legislation, wouldn't you want to be sitting at the table so you can tell us, oh, no, don't do that because that'll impact us in this way.
Right.
And we can say,
Hmm.
oh, we don't want to have you to have a negative impact because
Hmm.
school choice movement, part of it is the homeschool movement. So
Yeah.
I just advocate that we become partners and we try and draft the best legislation possible. Now, the First Amendment is already, 200 and something years old. So that protects a lot of homeschoolers. So we just need to strengthen the bills, make sure the homeschoolers are taken into account. And at the end of the day, if you're not taking the money, how are they going to regulate you? You're
Right.
saying we don't want
That's
this
true.
money involved because it comes with strings attached. But if you say, well, I'm opting out, like you're doing right
Hmm.
now, you're opting out. And guess what? There's multiple states that still have legislation that's regulating homeschooling. Are you aware of that? And they're
Yeah.
not getting any
Yeah.
money, and they still are
Right.
regulating homeschooling.
Right. Right.
So school choice movement isn't driving whether or not they decide to regulate homeschoolers.
Yeah. No, this is an interesting topic for me. It's something that I'm just studying and I love to discuss it and, just have the dialogue, have this open conversation and let's weigh the pros and cons and let's look at those who are using state funds elsewhere and those who are, totally against it. I get that too. But I think the discussion's important. And this isn't typically a topic that I spend a lot of time on with the show. My show's geared for pastors and churches that want to start their own schools. They want to start a micro school, a hybrid school. But I know that this, it's come up in some of my interviews with at least two of the pastors that I've interviewed. And they've said, if we had school choice in the state of Kansas, we would utilize it and we'd be able to serve more students. And this is a pastor who has a school operating out of their church. So I know we can't say across the board that Christians should be and are all opposed to this. That's just not true. And so we need to know that there's people in both camps. I think we need to respectfully, be able to have these conversations and allow each other to pursue these options. So it's interesting. So I appreciate you being on this show. You're not typically the person that I would interview. I interview a lot of school founders and pastors, but your background and your passion in education freedom is amazing. And I admire the fact that you're so passionate about this and view this as a movement and want to help us strategize. You want to help us to change and to reform education. Why do you feel like education needs reform? I know you talked about your background and your story, but what's happening in public schools today in K-12 education?
Okay, there's two levels to that. One of them, I have another framework because a part of strategy is framing. And so you have to you frame everything. And that's another huge asset that the left has. They understand how to push culture. You push the culture, then you're going to get the legislation. So if you don't get a really high level skill set on how to do that, you're going to flounder. And I feel like this side has been floundering, and this is why they are having the arguments but leaving out the frame. The frame drives everything. A good frame is better than a good argument. So so one of the frames that I use, and I call it embrace the marketplace. This should be a very pro-American, very patriotic stance. Just embrace the marketplace. The marketplace works. So now let's go back and give some examples. One of them, I have a presentation where I pull up on one side of the screen, the very first telephone. On the other side of the screen, I pull up the iPhone. You see how they don't look the same? Because they embrace the marketplace.
Mhm.
Pull up the first airplane. Pull up a space shuttle. Why don't they look the same? Because the airline and the that industry embraced the marketplace. So you can pull up a car, you can pull up any bit of technology and then bring up the modern version. You're going to see a big difference because we embrace the marketplace. Now, if you pull up the first school and you pull up a school now, they look the same.
Yeah, right.
Because we did not embrace the marketplace. So we have an industry that is stuck in the past. And in order to modernize it, we're going to have to bring market forces to bear.
Mm.
Right. So we have one size fits all coming from a government bureaucratic industry, and they force that one side. And so it leads to failure. Everybody knows that in every other area of their life. We just pretend we don't get it in this area. One size fits all. I just told you there's 50 million of those little chocolates on the conveyor belt. What are the chances they all have the same learning style?
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Wise and Otherwise. We'd like to ask you to take a minute and please rate and review our podcast so that others can learn more about us, and just to continue to show your support for this work that we're doing. It would mean so much. So please, if you're on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, take a minute and give us a good review. Thanks. Yeah, 0. I have 6 kids and none of them have the same learning style.
Right. So if
Yeah.
you just said, I'm going to take this square peg no matter what, and I'm just going to keep hammering it into that round hole, you're going to get a lot of damage. And that's what's happening. So when we get to the point where we have 82% illiteracy coming out of the Black community, this is a marketplace that has failed. You have 79% illiteracy, not on grade level for fourth graders. This is coming out of the government numbers for Hispanics, not on grade level. 52% of white students, not on grade level. So we're at the majority that it's now failed for. So I don't understand what signals we need to get from the marketplace before we say, oh, we got to pivot. If you were working for the phone company, the airline industry, the television industry, they would have already pivoted decades ago to start catching up or fixing the marketplace, because they're not going to get money. Now,
Right.
the only reason this marketplace is allowed to continue is because the government has force, and they can use force to get the taxes and make you keep paying for it. So school choice is a bomb in the industry. It's a bomb, because if they can't force you to come there, they either have to change or they have to lose a customer. So we have to go pour gasoline on the school choice movement, because we don't have another generation that we can afford to lose. We're already 2 generations down. Now the 3rd generation is swirling around the toilet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's interesting. I've heard you talk about one of the indicators that public school, government school is not working. We see that teachers who are in the public school system are choosing to send their kids to private school. And you have, I've heard you list numbers by states and the different categories. And it's like, what's going on? They are the insiders. They're getting the inside view into what's happening in the classroom, and they're choosing something else. They're homeschooling, or they're sending their kids to private school.
Correct. I was shocked when I found this study, and it's a little old, but there's no reason to believe that anything has changed. And the data showed that 11% of Americans send their children to private school. But in the education industry, K through 12 teachers, 20% of them send their children to private schools. So I came up with this other framework, and it's a little joke. So imagine you went to a restaurant. When you get there, you've never been there before. You sit down, everybody always asks the waiter, what's good on the menu? And what if they said, I don't know, I don't eat here?
Yeah, right.
That's what the
That's
teachers are telling you when they
exactly,
send their kid to a private school versus a public school. They're telling you
exactly.
they won't eat their products where they work.
Right.
That's scary. Those numbers are very high. The more urban the school district, there are school districts where 45% of the teachers send their children to private schools. So
Wow.
now remember, they're getting paid with taxpayer money. So their taxpayer money can go to a private school.
Yeah,
It's insanity.
that's so
They
interesting.
also, on the left, frame a lot of things in terms of the 1%. You know, the 1% does this. Why should the 1% get better life? Well, I can tell you one thing that the 1% does. 100% of the 1% send their kids to private school. Why can't we?
Yeah, right, right. Well, and then I like to frame this, again, going back to the parent responsibility, the parent's role in education. And then I also like to turn it around because we are talking about the church's role in education.
Correct.
So, school choice, it puts the opportunity, it gives the parents the freedom to choose the path for their students.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit more. What do you feel like the parents' role is? And do you know families or parents, how are they getting creative to serve their kids and to provide a quality education?
Well, the first role of the parent is partner. The parents have to be the partner. If they're not going to be the complete driver, which is what homeschooling means, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
be the complete driver. If you're not going to be the complete driver, historically, the parents were the partners, the teachers were the partners, and the parents dominated. Somehow, over the last 50 years, there's been a major shift where not only are parents not partnering, they're not even welcome. They're being arrested in the last few years because they are trying to have an impact on the industry, the K through 12 industry. So that's another message the marketplace is sending, that you should be leaving. Don't stay. Imagine a babysitter that you brought into your home and they say, no, you can't have any say on what I'm going to do. Not only that, you can't even come here and you have to let me know before you come.
Yeah,
What if you dropped your child off?
insane.
Yeah, this, so we're at a level of insanity that I'm in shock that
Right.
there hasn't been, like, again, me being a union steward, I'm like, parents, why aren't you going on strike? This is sort of bizarre.
Oh my goodness. It's crazy. Parents, I feel like they've just become kind of immune to it. They've kind of acclimated because this is what everybody does. You send your kids off when they're like sometimes 3 and 4, and it's the norm. It's crazy to me though that we have allowed schools, government schools in particular, to take that role and to assume that position of educating our children without our participation. And again, with the church has completely stepped back and allowed the government schools to take over and to do this. And I have a friend, Dr. Lisa, in
Mhm.
California, and she is very strong in believing in parent-pastor partnerships. And I
Correct.
think there's something powerful to that. Bringing the role of the pastor, the role of the church, the role of the parent, partnering them together in educating the children with this design and intentional model where we're educating our children to train them in the Lord.
A
Um,
100%. So, imagine I go decades without reading the Bible. Then when I start reading the Bible, the Lord just lifts anything to do with education off of the page because that's my calling. And I'm
mhm,
excited because I never had a calling before. I heard of it,
mm.
but I never had one. So now I'm like, oh, exciting. So, and I'm shocked to read the very first proverb was, in this version that I was reading, it said, do not sit at the knee of unbelievers. And
Mm.
that just pierced my heart because I automatically thought about children. Like, don't sit, the very first one is the
Mm.
warning. Don't sit at the knee of unbelievers. Don't sit in the council of unbelievers, because that's going to drive them to a certain, their unbelief drives them to certain understandings and outcomes. It's just
Mhm.
logical because you don't
Mhm.
have this information that's informing your decision making. So how can we be sitting toddlers at the knee of unbelievers and then being shocked when you put that chocolate at one end of the conveyor belt, then you're shocked at what comes out the other end? No, that doesn't make any sense. It's pretty much ordained what's going to come out of the other end. And here's
Right.
the evidence that I tell people. So a Christian evangelical will send their child to an atheist school district for 30 hours a week. But an atheist parent would not send their child to Sunday school 1 hour a week
Mm.
because
Yeah.
they know I'm not going to let my child get exposed to those ideas. If they get exposed to
Right.
the ideas, then that's going to logically lead them to a certain outcome,
Sure.
or a good
Exactly.
chance that it will, because that's the
Sure.
power of the gospel. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, but we will do the complete opposite 30 hours a week. So when the parents
Yeah.
come to me and say, oh, they just want to tell me their story, they just want to be unburdened about what's
Mm.
happening. And my child, we raised him going to church and now he doesn't believe, and it grieves them. And I say, oh, did
Mhm.
they go to public school? Yeah. I don't think I've ever met one that told me that they didn't go to public school.
Yeah.
So,
Let's talk about what's happening in public school. Let's talk
oh,
about this leftist agenda. You mentioned some of the things that are happening. I've heard on your podcast and others, SEL, CRT, 1619, Common Core, not to mention all the transgender, all this stuff that's happening. Why is this a toxic environment? Why is it dangerous for our kids to be there?
it's 100% dangerous, which is why I'm an abolitionist.
Mm.
It's 100% dangerous. And one of the things that I tell people, again, back to this framing, is to think of that game whack-a-mole. You don't know what's going on when you're not in the room. So if that teacher has the agenda of CRT, or has the agenda of DEI, or has the agenda of drag queen story hour, you're not going to find out about it. By the time you find out about it, it's usually too late. If you
Mhm.
have toddlers, you don't know if they've read those sexually inappropriate
Mhm.
books to them. You don't know.
Yeah.
So we see what's going on. That's just what we're finding out. Whatever we're
Mhm.
finding out is probably 10 times more that you're not finding out. I heard a story on another show I was listening to, where the parent found out that her son was being told that he's really a girl. This was not something that the child brought to the teacher. The teacher told
Mhm.
the child that he doesn't know whether or not he's a boy yet, and planted that seed. And the little
Wow.
boy started manifesting at home, and he was starting to try on her clothes and her shoes. And she was like, what is going on? You were never doing that before. And then he said, well, I don't know if I'm a girl.
Oh my
And
goodness.
she was like, what do you mean you don't know if you're a girl or you're a boy?
Yeah.
So again, by the time you find out about it, it could be too late. Now, they were able
Mhm.
just to pull their children out, go to a private school, and everything went right back to the way it was before. But
Mhm.
they're in danger, and we
Yeah.
don't know which ones are in danger yet. There's 50
Mm.
million students in 99,000 government schools.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about the church's role. Okay, churches, pastors listening to this show, wanting to know, feeling concerned, feeling burdened. You see the problem. What is the role of the church and how can they be activated and enter the arena and get involved in saving and rescuing our children?
Okay, so one, I am going to launch a new program. I didn't think this was required, but the more I meditated on it, the more I thought it was as simple as me telling people, well, why don't you just start a school in your church? I thought it was that uncomplicated, but apparently it's not. People are frozen. They don't know the next steps to take. They don't understand this social movement thing that I talk about, and that there's ingredients to the social movement, and the way we're going to affect the culture, we're going to turn things around, is we have to build these parallel movements. And school choice has the power to be one of those. So I'm going to give a little framework first before I answer that question. The framework that I talk about on my show is the 7 ingredients, and I give the parallel. I do a quiz. Hey, have you ever heard of the feminist movement? Yes. Have you ever heard of the civil rights movement? Yes. Have you ever heard of the environmental movement? Yes. The labor movement? Yes. The marriage equality movement? Yes. The pro-choice movement? Yes. The left uses social movements as a vehicle to affect all of these changes. And apparently they've been going on along all around everyone, and no one has really noticed it and nailed down to say, wait a minute, that's their tool. And I'm
Yeah.
telling you, that's their tool. So when I ask conservatives about the names of their movements, they sort of get dumbstruck
Yeah.
because you don't have any. You have a half of a movement. You have a half of a movement. It doesn't have all of the ingredients, but there's a half movement. So once we start making these movements, understanding with intentionality, okay, get intentional and understand that these 7 ingredients and say, okay, we don't have this ingredient. Let's put that one in place. Let's put this one, put all of them in place. Even your slogans are important because that's what the frames are. The left has the frames, they have the symbols, they have the way that they speak about everything, and it's designed to bring people along, and it's been bringing the culture along for a long time. So get back to school choice and the role of the churches. When I mentioned the 7 ingredients, one of them is infrastructure. That makes sense. You got to have infrastructure in
Yeah.
your movement. So I gave a specific number for the left. They have 99,000 government schools. The churches, the lowest number I've seen is 330,000.
Wow.
So you
Yeah.
have 3 times as much infrastructure, but theirs is working 5 days a week,
Right.
and ours is working a half, maybe a couple of hours a week.
Mm.
So I challenge people that are listening to your show. For 1 week, you're not going to be able to stop, but at least for 1 week, whenever you're driving around, running the grocery store, running to the yoga studio, running to the bank, driving to work, I want you to notice on any random Thursday, any random Wednesday, any random Monday, notice how many churches you drive by with completely empty parking lots.
Yeah.
No one's in there. The infrastructure already exists. They already have a gas bill, light bill, water bill, phone bill, internet bill. They already have the building. They already have the furniture. They're 90% down the lane, and all they got to do is open up the buildings. You
Right.
literally can put flat screen TVs on the wall. You can get
Yeah.
free curriculum online. If it's not free, it's very low cost. Ron Paul, a patriot's patriot, has released his own curriculum that is completely free for K through 6. So
Wow.
what church couldn't turn on the internet, turn on the television, have a teacher or a couple of volunteers that come in, 30, 40, 50, 100 students could easily fit inside of every church in America.
Yes.
That is the pastor's job. He literally has those children there on Sunday. And then on Monday, he's not willing to have them. They have Sunday school already.
Yeah. Right.
So this is not a heavy lift.
Yeah.
But I am launching, hopefully pretty soon, something that I'm just going to call micro school coaching.
Love it.
And I
Yes.
will coach someone
Oh,
for
yeah.
what I'm calling 12 steps. I'm breaking down 12 steps to opening a micro school.
Right. Well, so many times we overcomplicate this process. And I think the church has just been immobilized. They've just been like paralyzed, like, oh, starting a Christian school, that has to look like, this big building down the block. And we have to have
Yeah.
the whole administrative, every role for every position and every teacher for every grade and all that. And it's like, no, you don't. It's as simple as what you just described. And I like to refer to them as creative Christian learning environments.
I'm going to
It
write
can,
that down.
oh yeah, it can look like anything. I mean, you decide how many days a week are you going to open up your school? Is it full time? Is it part time? Are you mornings? Are you afternoons? Are you, doing online stuff? Are you bringing in tutors? But it takes volunteers from your congregation, and it takes a Sunday school room or a fellowship hall.
Yes. Not only that, my goal for every school is I'm calling them $1 million micro schools. I will coach you to $1 million in revenue. to prove to you that schools they're businesses. You are an
Wow.
edupreneur. No one is saying that you do not make money, that your teachers work for free. We're not saying that. We're saying that we can build businesses because the Lord said, do business until I come. And he
Oh,
is
that's
going
good.
to give blessings if people do open schools. He's going to give a blessing, and I'm going to coach you to get there.
That's amazing. Well, you keep us posted on that, the micro school coaching. Absolutely. That's needed. And I think we just need this message to get out there. We need pastors and churches to know what's feasible, what's possible. We need to give them the vision. The need is there, and we just have to show the way. We can solve this problem. The
We
church
can.
they are primed, ready. They're positioned. They just don't know it yet.
No,
So.
they don't know. They don't know. And if your state has passed school choice legislation, which 35 states have passed, we're past the majority of states now. So people don't know the legislation. I'm going to summarize the legislation for you. I'm going to summarize what the Supreme Court rulings have been, and we've had 3 in the last few years. I will summarize that for everyone and how that will apply to their state, and then I will give them the tools. We can review step by step what it takes to get that school up and running.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so if our listeners want to be in touch or they want to listen to your podcast, again, it's called Schools Out with Lisa Watson. How else can they get in touch with you?
Okay, we'll go to the Herzog Foundation. Herzog actually has an amazing mission where they are giving free training for people who also are trying to launch a private school. So go and join their school box program. Go to herzogfoundation.org, I believe, and sign up for their school box program. Also, if you want to get in touch with me, you can send an email to, you can follow me on social media. I'm Watson Speaking on Twitter. I know they changed the name, but I still like the name Twitter. Watson Speaking on Twitter. Or you can send me a text to 913-804-0605. You can send me a text and I will reply.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's been very insightful. I love your perspective. You bring a totally different taste, different angle, your background, and I know the Lord is using that, and it's incredible to see. So thank you for sharing with us and being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
All right. And thanks to our listeners. We'll see you again next time. Bye.